please come up afterwards, and I'd love to meet you and say hi. We've got a lot of really great changes going on at JESPY. And one of the important things we want to do is improve communication and give you all of the information that we can. So we're absolutely thrilled to have these two women here, Lisa Parles and Denise Reckham, who are really the authority on everything DVD, we hope, and are going to talk to us. And please ask a lot of detailed questions, because this is what they do for a living. They are so involved in this area. Denise, of course, is our board member. We just honored her last week at our fundraiser. So she's really, really a very, very important part of JESPY, and we're so thrilled that they're here. I just want to introduce Mitch. Mitch, come on up and say a few words. Mitch put this together. You guys know Mitch for many years, so.
Thank you all so much for coming. It's good to see so many familiar faces. So I'm really not going to talk a lot about this evening's presentation. I'm going to allow Lisa and Denise to do most of the presenting. I stopped counting after the number 20 between phone calls and emails over the last week and a half. If my family member who's part of JESPY is not a DDD client, it's really necessary for me to come to this meeting. So I just wanted to address that question first, because it's a really important question. And my answer to all of these families that I've spoken to over the last, many of you who are in this room tonight, is that yes, it doesn't directly affect your family member who's here at JESPY, because maybe they're not a DDD client, and they're not getting funding from DDD, and they're not going to transition to this Medicaid fee-for-service system. But the entire transition to Medicaid fee-for-service will affect us as an agency. And we really need to rethink and spend some time going back to see how we design our services to meet some of the billable services that we'll be able to bill Medicaid for DDD clients, and hopefully adopt a system that will work for all of our clients. We spoke with many of you about the fee structure here at JESPY, how we are going to really identify the cost of our services, again, falling in line with what fee-for-service is all about. So every client here will have a detailed report. They'll have what their services are, and the cost of those services will be more identified. So even if your family member is not a DDD client and is not going to transition to this Medicaid fee-for-service system, it's really important to know that this transition is not just related specifically to DDD. It's going to affect all the providers in the state of New Jersey who have contracted with DDD over the years. We've been involved with DDD for well over 25, 30 years now. Many clients receive funding from DDD in a variety of different ways, and all of that is about to change, and is really it's a lot of anxiety, because we don't know what to expect. Unfortunately, a lot of times many families have questions that we can't answer because no one is giving us the answer, and DDD is not telling us one way or another which way to go. So thankfully we have experts here tonight who will share with us their knowledge. We're really up to date on the day-to-day changes, and I literally mean day-to-day changes in TDD. So we will hopefully, at the end of this presentation, again, like Audrey said, ask lots of questions. Tomorrow there is a public session down at Seton Hall in Newark to offer comments, concerns, questions in a public forum on the state transition plan, which we're going to talk about tonight. There's no registration required. You can show up. There's more information in the emails that went out. And please, if you do not sign in, please sign in with your email, because we're really trying to reach out to everyone via email with all of our information to share. Okay, so without any further ado, please.
So thank you everyone for coming out today to learn more about the statewide transition plan. As Mitch and Audrey both said, it's really a critical change in how the state is going to be funding services for individuals with developmental disabilities that is going to have an impact on the state for years. So, in a certain level, you're also here representing the mom and dad with a 3-year-old child with autism or another developmental disability who can't even think about what life will be like for their child when they get older, and is totally unaware and really can't be aware because of where their mind has to be when they have such a young child, of these changes. So I think we also have this responsibility to make sure the state does things the right way for all of the people that are going to be coming up through the system and are going to be impacted by these changes. There is a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, so when we're finished, if you'd like to take a copy home with you, you can take that from up here. The presentation is going to start sort of at the beginning with what is a statewide transition plan, just to make sure that everybody understands what it is, and then we'll be talking about New Jersey's plan, the original plan, and what changes have been made to the plan based on advocacy that has been going on for the past year, and what advocacy we feel still needs to happen. And then we'll end with showing you some of the interesting projects that are happening throughout the country that would be very difficult, if not impossible, under New Jersey's statewide transition plan if it is not amended further. So I'm going to actually turn it over to Lisa Parles, my partner, who has been in the room where it happens, as Lin-Manuel Miranda, if anyone knows Hamilton. Anyway, she's really been at the forefront of the advocacy on this important issue, and I'm going to turn it over to her to begin.
Okay, so this is the summary, and then we're going to back into it. Okay, when you think about New Jersey's current plan, think of it this way. Build it, occupy it, run it, but float it. I will explain what that means, but that's what I hope you all leave with the idea that we have to get out there and voice our request, our demand, our wants, our need for an array of services, and that the state needs to get behind these projects, because I think there's only a tiny percentage of us that will be able to do what I just described. So let me back up and tell you what I meant by that. Also, let me add to that I'm the mother of a 26-year-old with autism. His birthday is today, so it shows the power of dreams. And I drove 3 hours, but did get to see him a little bit earlier in the day. And he's out with his dad tonight. So that's really sort of the explanation on why I'm doing what I do, how I was a labor and employment lawyer and a law professor, and now ended up with, I think my caseload is 99.9% autism at this point. So that's you know, the situation in terms of background. Now we're going to run through the slides. I'm going to run through some of them, and we may come back to it, but I think it's just to give you this nutshell. I did this presentation about 2 weeks ago in South Jersey, and we actually started with like an 18-minute sort of compact version and then went back and backed up. So let's start sort of with the basics. So what is an SDP, right? Stands for Statewide Transition Plan. And why we have them is because the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, Medicaid made everyone look at what are we spending our dollars on. And the one thing we know is that we don't want to spend dollars on institutions with these home and community-based funds, right? So that was sort of the heart of it and how it began. So this is going on throughout the country right now. So this is not just New Jersey, although parts of our plan, sadly, I must tell you, are New Jersey only things, which one of the reasons I'm hoping you'll all get out this month and explain what the impact of this is going to be. But it is really happening across the country, and each state is essentially putting together their plans and telling the feds, this is what we're going to spend our money on, and the process is going to be finished by 2019, but forever it will continue in terms of what the rules will be in trying to show that we're not spending our money on institutions. Advance a little arrow usually then. Yeah. Okay, so I mentioned the home and community-based services. So you've heard the term waiver before? Anybody? Yes? Okay, so we have a couple waivers in New Jersey, but this is the one I'm going to talk about tonight, because this is the waiver that funds day programs and residential services for adults with developmental disabilities, right? So that's also known as the community care waiver, so the CCW. So when we talk about waiting lists, that's what people are sitting on the waiting list to get, because that gives you not only residential services, but it actually gives you a more robust budget for your day program. So what did the feds say, right? So when this all started at the federal process, at that table discussing what we were going to spend our money on and what our goals were all different views. And one of the views was that inclusion is the single most important measure of quality. And I think I'm here to tell you tonight that I don't believe that. I think that inclusion is a very important element and it's a goal, but it can't be the only measure of it. And one of the reasons is I think that embedded in this push for in-the-community inclusion is this horrible premise that there's something wrong that when people with disabilities spend time together. Now, let's think about that for a minute, right? What other group would we say, there's too many of you together, right? So one of the rules that New Jersey is imposing is that in bigger complexes, no more than 25% of the residents can have a disability, or in truth, can have DVD funds. Now, in the new plan, I will tell you there's a way that they're saying they'll consider those projects, but that underlying premise is that that's sort of the goal. And why is it? Well, where did that come from? Well, at the federal level, some of the things that ended up in New Jersey's first and second, and now in some degree the third plan, were really, were rooted in that we don't want segregation. And that's a good thing, right? We don't want people shut off, and we have a terrible history in New Jersey. We had more developmental centers, I believe, than any state. I think per capita we led the state. And they were big, giant, monolith things that, you know, people didn't leave them to get their hair cut. So we're sort of over here, right? So if there was this sort of spectrum and array of services, we started over here. But now, in my view, in the view of many advocates throughout the country, the pendulum is swinging, whoa, way over here. So now, the only thing that they want to look at as a quality service is a 4-person group home or a cluster within a bigger project, but no more than too many of you together, because there's something wrong with that. I find that offensive and objectionable. And I also think that other groups have the right to congregate and to be with each other. Think of some of our other examples. I live in an over 55 community. My husband's the one with the gray hair. I'm almost there though. So, you know, that's okay, right? I remember the very first time I sat with a reporter. I was actually a documentary filmmaker and a reporter on this sort of issue of, you know, what's wrong with intentional communities? What's wrong with clusters? What's wrong with, you know, even just a couple of houses together or an apartment building where 51% of the people have disabilities? And they were doing the interview on a college campus. And I remember the filmmaker saying, wait a second, that's a dorm right there. They're all living together. Yeah, that's right. So could we say with good conscience, there's too many African Americans here. There's too many Jewish people here. There's too many women. There's too many of you together. It is an inherent principle and belief, I think, that is underlying this push to inclusion, that there's something wrong about that. I think we can have both. I think we can have choices, options, an array of services without imposing. Because when we were over here, and all we had was those giant psychiatric hospitals and developmental centers, we forced people, right? And when we're swinging away all the way over here, what are we doing? We're still forcing people. And I think there's something wrong with that. So now this is what the Fed ruled. So in that debate, when everyone was discussing what are we going to have, what are the rules, they actually did try to put in, there were factions that argued for bed limits, so no group home bigger than 4, some that even argued for smaller, and density limitations. So anything that you do, once you get over 4, it could be, you know, is anyone familiar with any of the Bergen County United Way projects? Okay, so there's some really amazing things that are going on, that have been going on for years. Many of them that are really hitting roadblocks because of some of these restrictions. And they're small little clusters, 10, 12 people living in, you know, the heart of some wonderful communities. And so that idea that once you get into a cluster or a community or a co-located program, I didn't talk about that, I'll get to that in a minute, is that these rules impact farmsteads as well, right? Because generally, people with disabilities are working together can be over 25%. They might be the only people other than staff working there. And there's also a lot of, well, I won't say a lot, let's say a forceful minority that is come out against the concept of farmsteads, that you shouldn't live and work in the same place because that excludes you. I don't know, I think farmers mostly live and work in the same place, right? So our non-disabled peers that are farmers, that's how they're doing it. So why would we shut that option off? So what happened is that was a faction, and there was a great debate, and across the country, and people came in and said, no, we want choices. You know what? There's enough roadblocks, there's enough mountains to climb, there's enough hurdles. Let's not make more restrictions. We want to encourage choices and innovation and a variety, right? So they actually won, because look what we got. No bed limitations, no density restrictions, right? No ban on a co-located program, which is a campus or a farmstead. It was outcome oriented. And I think that's the most important thing, that it's looking at whether or not it's meeting the needs of the person, reflected in the person-centered plans, and it's not based on physical location of the setting, the size of the setting, or a prescribed duration or number of community-based activities. So the rule came out and said, what are we going to look at to decide if something's an institution? We're going to look at the people's experience. That makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. Because big isn't always bad, and small isn't always good. And a couple months ago in the fall, I was at a National Coalition for Community Choice. I think we have them on some of our materials. Fabulous national organization that has really been at the table from the beginning, and a great, not only a source of advocacy, but just technical assistance. That's literally reading every plan, following every project and every development. They had a gathering in Chicago at a program called Misericordia, which is in Chicago, large. I think several hundred people live there. It was a fabulous, fabulous program. They had a greenhouse and a restaurant that the community came in and had their meals. Lots of volunteers, actually volunteers that were coming from other countries as well. And at that meeting, when they were going around to have people talk about the various plans, they actually, when they called on me, they said, oh, Lisa Parr, let's let her go. She has the strictest plan in the country. Okay? And we can't let that happen, right? So experiences. And looking at some really important ideas about individual choice and individual initiative and looking at privacy and dignity and respect. I mean, very, very critical goals that we want to achieve. But they got away from that. But this is one thing they did do. They said, however, states can be stricter if they want. Right? So that battle was lost. But I will tell you, the grand majority of states are not electing to be stricter. And many states have amazing collaborations going on between DVDs and providers and families and persons served. And we're seeing some really interesting, innovative projects coming up. So these are some other things that went into law about people having leases. So that way it would be a consumer-controlled setting. I think that's a really good thing, too, where people have the same rights that a tenant would in a project. So there'll be individual leases. So that was a good thing. When they were looking at things on whether or not it looked institutional, these were some of the factors that they looked at, that, being able to have visitors and making your own schedule and making choices, choice of roommates, having keys, not having, a locked refrigerator or regimented meal times. But this is important, that in the federal rule, though, they did allow for an exception, and that is very important. In terms of the spectrum of disabilities, there is a good percentage of people, particularly with autism, that have severe behavioral needs, that if they had a key, they could elope and they would be in danger. We have had clients with Prader-Willi syndrome where there's sort of this insatiable appetite. So if they didn't have access controlled, they would literally eat until they die. So this was built in, okay, but when we're looking and we're evaluating a program, those are the goals, but we understand when it's a person-centered plan, we have to look at what does that person need, right, in order to thrive and to be happy and to be safe in many cases. So they were pretty clear that these are the things that don't use your waiver dollars on, right? So that makes sense. A nursing facility, an institution, an ICF. Our developmental centers are considered ICFs, a hospital. And then now anything else that seems institutional, oh, that's where I have to come into New Jersey's defense. The feds have not been perfect in this either. A lot of this is confusing. And a lot of it is statements with not a lot of explanation behind it. So I feel the pain of the developmental disabilities directors community because this is confusing stuff and there's not a lot of clarity. And it is the type of thing that's going to evolve over time as we see projects across the country get approved. So in their defense, when we have something sort of like any other setting that does this bad thing, it makes you wonder, well, okay, so what is an institution and what is not going to be allowed? This is actually one program that did get approved, and they were on the grounds of a developmental center. So they, everyone thought, no way. But you know what? They came in, they actually brought an independent group to come in and evaluate, and they said, so what? Normally we would, at first blush, if we were just looking at settings, saying this is bad, it's on the grounds. But when I looked at what people's experiences were, it was very inclusive. Okay. So in the end, we did not have that. There's no size setting, physical characteristics, or person limits. Now, I'm just going to say briefly, too, is that these concepts also apply to day programs. So there is a mandate that people are getting access to the community. I guess the best way to describe it is access to community in the manner that their non-disabled peers would have. Again, a very laudable goal. Actually, Ohio put this out. Ohio put out, because there was so much confusion over, well, if it's inclusion, does that mean that we're, you're going to have all these bans on that people being together, or you can't have any community activities? I mean, look, here's the reality. 2 points that I think people forget when they're doing forced inclusion. One is that there's a cost factor. And programs right now are going through very difficult times. Not just that funds are cut, but in this fee-for-service, some don't know if they're going to survive. So that sort of goal, without giving the money, is actually really unfair. But here's the second piece. What if people with disabilities want to be together with their peers? Don't they have that choice? We all choose, right, in terms of who we're going to congregate with. I'm now deciding who I play bocce with. I can't believe I actually say that. We actually have one. Okay, so Ohio's, I'm going to point to Ohio because Ohio is actually one of the 3 states that their actually full plan was approved. Ohio is a very interesting story if you look at what happened with them. When they came out with their first plan, which now was what, 18 months ago when all the plans first came out, they had to be, I think, out sent to CMS by March of 2015. So in Ohio, when they first came out, Ohio's plan looked like it was going to ban farm communities. And I don't know if anyone's ever heard of Bittersweet Farms, but it's one of the very first farm communities for developmentally disabled adults, and it's been replicated in many states and several times in Ohio. So Ohio's farm community and quite frankly, service providers, families, persons served, advocates, there was an uproar. They said, hold on a second. What do you mean, no farm communities? You can't just assume because someone lives and works in the same location that they're not having a community-based experience, right? Maybe they have they have a farm stand at the end of the road and community is coming in. Maybe they do go out to dinner and get their haircut and bowl on Thursday nights. You can't just base on this model just by the fact that they are in a farmstead and living, working in the same location that it's a bar. So what happened in Ohio is Ohio changed their plan. And after they changed the plan, their entire congressional delegation wrote a letter to the feds and said to them, in essence, we have farmsteads and we like them, and they're not institutions, and we're having more of them, and you better approve them. And in addition to that, CMS came out with, after the federal rule, this guidance where they answered questions. And there was a lot more confusion because in it they were like, well, what are examples of things that may tend to be isolating? And they gave a farmstead as an example. But you have to read it carefully because it doesn't say you can't have them. It just says we're concerned about it. So when you're building them and you're having them and you're running them, make sure that you're offering opportunities for people to be out and about and enjoy and live and benefit from the community the way our non-disabled peers would. Okay?
How did the people in Ohio, I don't know if there was force,
How did they do it?
how did they get it done?
It really was a grassroots movement, and I think it really was started by the farm communities, and there were several farm communities that were in the works. So they saw, oh, this is going to be a problem. We're not going to be able to have what we want. So, okay, so now, in terms of the federal process, states they're looking at everything they have, and they have to make a determination of, does it look like it's, let's just say, meets the test, okay? So does it meet the test? And they can say yes or no. And if, one of the things they can do is that if they're not sure, so say you have a farmstead, and you say, I'm not sure if the feds are going to be all right with this. You can put it through something called heightened scrutiny, which is a federal process. Now, how that works is that the entity works with the state, and they put together the evidence to show that their project is in fact an inclusive project. And if we don't know because we've only got that one project, and it's all really at the start line at this point, right? Nowhere near the finish. But when you go through that and they submit it, that if it's yes, you're good. If it's no and it can't be modified, then you're not going to be able to have it. Now there I will also say something in defense of our Division of Developmental Disabilities, in fairness to them, because I'm going to have a lot of things to say that I'm not so happy about, okay? But I will say is that is what states are concerned about, right? We don't want to build things and then eventually the feds say you can't have it, right? And we certainly want to build things and people have to leave. And we don't want to build things and eventually get audited and the feds say, give us our matching dollars, right? So there's understandably caution. But what has happened in New Jersey is not caution. It's, honestly, it is just administrative convenience, laziness, and we can't be cowards in this. We have to do what other states are doing. In fact, other states, when I'm on these constantly on these national calls where I have all these strategy sessions and everybody is all talking about what they're doing at the federal level to make sure that everything gets approved. And I sort of have to sit back and think, okay, when we get to that and we have a better plan and we're not borrowing and making things impossible, then we can be in that fight to make sure that everything that really is of quality is getting the thumbs up from the feds and the money flowing, because it's the money. It's federal matching dollars, right? And that's a good thing. The fee-for-service, which I know everyone is, groaning over, which is basically the switch to pure Medicaid funding, it is a good thing. We're one of the last states to do it. We spend too many state-only dollars on our projects. So that is not a bad thing in itself. It's just the direction that we're going, which is much, much too narrow. Okay. So let's look at New Jersey's proposed. Okay, so here's a little bit of the timeline. So the first one came out, and many of you may not know of it. They require to have public input sessions. Ours came out, and I think at like 4 o'clock, And the first public hearing was the next morning. I was up through the night reading it. At 5 o'clock, I actually stood over the bed and stared at my husband, hoping as soon as he would move, it would say, "Can you read this? Because I'm going crazy. This looks really bad. This looks very restrictive. I don't know if I'm reading this right." And it was difficult to read. It was very confusing, but this does not sound good to me. You know what? I wrote my comments out, and it snowed. So we had 8 days. So 8 days later, they had the first public comment session, and what happened in that one was that about 40 people came, but only 8 of us spoke. Because it was still like, what is this? You know, what? And there was all sorts of, oh, the feds are making us do that, and we don't have a choice. And so we did, I guess about 2 weeks later, honestly, so there was born the Say No to the Statewide Transition Plan, which is a Facebook page where we used as a place for people to communicate. And if anyone wrote an editorial or gave a speech or even wrote a personal letter to show how it was going to affect their loved one, we posted it there. And we were able to get the word out, and several hundred people showed up. Unfortunately, they limited the time to 2 hours. Before the hearings, I actually called DDD and said, I know of people that are coming, and I'm doing the math, and at 3 minutes a person, that's not enough time. They still held it, and at 12 o'clock, there were something like 45 people that still hadn't spoken, including people with developmental disabilities, and they left. Despite the plea of the parents, stay, you need to hear from us. We're worried about this. This is going to affect our loved ones' futures. And people took off from work to be here. And they didn't stay. And that was horrific. That, to me, was one of the low points in our state's history. It was so disrespectful to not only the needs, but honestly, the pain and worry that so many of us have about our family members. So then I guess the best thing to describe is that after that we got a revision, and the revision came out. We did not have a public comment period, but more and more groups began looking at it. So in the first plan, I'll just tell you briefly first plan, then we'll jump to 3, okay? Oh, so the first plan did have the 4 to 6 bed limit for group homes, so nothing bigger than that, all right? The 6 is only in certain circumstances, and it really looks like medically fragile, people with significant medical needs, but for the most part, it's 4 bedrooms. 25 density limit for any kind of complex, and complex could mean 10 units. It could be a little cluster, like the very first Allendale project, Crescent Commons. Crescent Orchard Commons? Orchard Commons was the first one. It's a little tiny complex, a couple 1 and 2 bedroom units, fabulous program. That was actually my home, my town. And we were, we watched that project go up, and we watched it thrive. Wonderful, wonderful inclusion story. Because in addition to residents walking to town, Allendale embraced them and came in. The mayor came and got them on 4th of July and said, let's go to the fireworks. The women's club was coming in and running a game night. Another group was doing a walking club. It was a beautiful, beautiful program. So,
and it was also private apartment houses. So we have some apartment buildings here in town that more than 25% of the tenants are individuals with disabilities. Private, these are not state or agency owned, these are private buildings, and those rules still apply. So those rules were saying that it defies logic that a landlord should say to a prospective tenant, oh, I can't rent to you, you have a disability. Like,
and you have a Medicaid,
and you're on Medicaid, so you're not allowed to live here because everyone will lose their funding. I mean, the whole thing is so discriminatory and ludicrous.
And I've heard a very callous response to that too. Oh, well, they can live there, but you just can't take your money with you. Which, honestly, folks, that means you can't live there, right? When you think about meeting the service needs. Okay, so it had an outright ban on campuses, intentional communities, farmsteads, and that requirement that they spend 75% of the day in the community. That was allowed. That was in New Jersey very loud. On a number of reasons. One is that that it's almost impossible to do on our finances, we have some really good programs in our center that our individuals want to do and like, right? And we don't want you coming in and counting heads, right? We're really on the wrong path when we're counting people based on what their category is, right? This is very serious, serious stuff. So that was the most restricted in the country, and they did a new one. Are we up to the next one?
Well, this one includes, they changed it.
Okay,
to
so they
majority
changed
of
it
the
to the majority of the time, and they, you know, I can't use the word grandfather because they still had to review the existing projects, but existing projects were okay. And honestly, there was one project that had like just opened 4 months ago, and I had, you know, clients that were moving in, and I'm thinking, my God, you know, under this, they're gonna have to all move out. And some of these projects are this wonderful combination of a municipality or a foundation or even family members, you know, giving land and bringing resources. We want to encourage that, right? We want to encourage this cooperation outside of the state, right? For philanthropic measures as well. So they changed it, and they made it the majority of the time. And so it's a little softer, and I'm not going to talk about that day program rules, but in the version 3, I will have to say, okay, and I got to look at the camera, good job, DVD, okay? They actually did. They moved to person-centered planning with the goal of inclusion, explained a little bit more about what providers are going to have to do to show that they're making efforts for people to access their communities. So I'm certain there's still bumps and bruises and perhaps issues, but for the most part, they really did hear us. So, you know, hooray to all of us, right? Okay, and hooray to them for listening. Okay, but what they do in the residential? Okay, so, well, let's start with the good, okay? So they said no ban. Okay, no 4 to 6 person limit on a group home. That's good because a lot of agencies have group homes that are bigger and they're barely swinging it because people have significant needs, right? Okay, you could be more than 25%. You could even be up to 100%. You could have a co-located program. You could be a campus. You could be an intentional community. You could be a farmstead, right? That's great. However, there we are, started the lecture. There's going to be something called the State Density Review, which according to the Coalition for Community Choice, and I've been on several calls with them, that's a New Jersey thing, okay? The statewide density review kicks in once you hit those numbers. 26%, you gotta go through the statewide density review. All right, you say, well, you know what? At least it's a possibility, right? It's better than a ban, and we'll work together and collaboratively show what we're going to do on these projects, many of that are in the pipeline, except here's the problem. They will not let you use your money until the density review is complete. So that means build it, occupy it, run it, float it, and then they'll come in and look. In these days of challenges with shrinking dollars and agencies literally clawing to survive in this massive transition we're doing with Medicaid funding, it's impossible. However, it's not impossible. I'm sorry, let me correct myself. It's not impossible. It is, no doubt, in my view, there will be projects with this system that will get through it. And you know what it will be? It will be for people with fabulous wealth and little needs. Because if you have significant support needs, it takes a lot of money to float a project, right? Some residential programs, $150,000 a year, 24/7 with the behavioralists. Add in nursing, the dollars become astronomical. So this is really gonna hurt people with high need. It's also really gonna hurt people that are independent and want to live together in a cluster or an intentional community. So, but if you have a lot of money, maybe you could get together and you could get donated land and you could build something and you could float it for a little bit and you'll get through it. I suspect that under this, some projects will get through. To me, This is worse. This is two worlds. And I'm not talking about that this is going to affect the urban poor. This is going to affect almost all of us. Because how many people have those resources that can do that? Very, very few. We're talking really big dollars. And even projects that have other things behind it, it's a risky. Oh, I don't know. You think a town's looking at, well, we could donate it for this, or we could do it for this. Let's go with the park, because we could build this thing, and they could say people can't live there. Or only 25% of the people can live there. So, then lots of questions over who's going to do the review. What do we get next? Okay, now, so these are just, I just picked Ohio because it's approved, and great example of advocacy. So looking at it, you know, we've got this restriction. You got to go under this density review. They don't have anything, no restrictions, no caps. They look at, you know, the person's experience. HUD 811, money follows the person. What is that? That's in our document. I actually pulled that. So, in our statewide transition plan, sorry I'm fumbling like this. At one point, this was in the first version too, okay? They, actually in the second version, they didn't say it clearly, like 25%, 4 to 6 beds. See, we were losing our mind for like 3 days. We just kept reading it and reading and reading, and thankfully we had the help of this national.
And we're lawyers.
Right.
I mean, this is supposed to be written for parents. And you shouldn't have to be an attorney to read it. And I mean, I couldn't even read it on my screen. I had to print it out, underline it, and we were cross-referencing all of these other programs and what they were, just to figure out, because it was so convoluted.
So what are those things? Okay, so, because they cited that, like, we're going to follow the guidelines under HUD 811. Okay, well, what's HUD 811, right? I've spoken to people all over the country about HUD 811 since this report came out, okay? HUD 811 was a project for low-income housing, for affordable housing, and it did have a 25% cap on people with disabilities. But it was serving all different kinds of populations. So it was like, well, 25%. It's not even funded today, okay? It's not funded. So you know what? Why don't we just go back to the veterans bill from after World War II and look at what those percentages were, because it's about as relevant. Second, money follows the person. What's that? That's the 4 to 6 bed limit. That was a small demonstration project with incentive funds to get people out of developmental centers. Okay, so
Also no more funding. It's done.
right. It's not funded either. Okay, so in our plan, they're saying we're going to follow the restrictions in that. That's our source. Let me tell you what the problem I have with that. One, I don't think you should write public documents that people have to go and look up other statutes. That's just plain wrong, right? Second, especially with the challenges we have to get through the day, sometimes you just figure out how you can take a shower, right, and do everything else you need to do. So that's wrong. The second is that, okay, so there's some federal programs, there are some programs that have these limits. My response to that is, so what, right? It doesn't dictate your housing plans. It in no way dictates statewide. And we went back and we asked CMS, several different groups, what is this? Is this? There's no density limits. There's no 4 to 6 bed restrictions. Those things do not have anything to do with the final rule. So it's in here. It was in there in one, and it's in here again. And I think it is very confusing. So just to clear it up, yeah, they existed, but they're not dictating what we do, and other states certainly aren't looking at it. Okay. So now, in terms of looking at what the need is that when you look at the statistics of the percentage of people that are still living with a family caretaker, we see that the need is enormous. And this is another point that I would like to address, is that we've heard from our state that the waiting list which is thousands and thousands, I don't know, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, I'm not sure, I haven't really gotten a firm answer on that, but several thousand, right? That's, you know what, that's not really a measure of the need, because sometimes when they get to people at the top of the list, they don't take residential. They elect for in-home supports, and that is true. Some people do that. We frequently have this in our office, and you want to know why? Because there's nothing good out there. That's why, right? So a lot of people say, forget it. If that's if my only an apartment in a low-income housing project, or a 4-person group home, which I think is going to be isolating, maybe nowhere near a train station, which is honestly more isolating. You know, my son lived in a community-based group home, and the only interaction he had with his neighbors was when they complained that the music therapist was too loud. So it's a fiction that just plopping people down that it's going to be. It takes more than that. It takes lots of effort and commitment. And that's what we should be measuring. Not size, not how many you are, but what is the experience? Is this quality? We need to look at quality indicators. So, tremendous need. Here's the other bad news. God, New Jersey. It is expensive, right? Look at that. I mean, really, people, the income needed to go out and just rent something and piece it all together is more than people have, even without developmental disabilities in many cases. So our need is great. And the other issue of, is that waiting list a measure of our need? I agree, it's not. Because you want to know why? It's much bigger. Because you know what? Some people aren't even on the list. I had people walk in my office, 60 years old, 70 years old, one time 82 years old. What's the waiting list? They don't know what it is. They don't know how to get on the list. Their children went out of state, maybe in an educational placement. I think what we need to look at, 2 things. One is how many caregivers are over 60 in New Jersey? Because that's a good measure of need, right? And also, what you have to remember, though, is that people don't get residential because their number came up in every circumstance. Sometimes they get it because of crisis, because of severe behaviors, because of self-injury, or aggression, or elopement, or pica, where they eat objects. So with those kind of profiles, those families are usually jumping the list in emergency. And that's a terrible circumstance. So that number, that is nowhere near the number. I agree with that. That number isn't a measure of need, but it's because it undermeasures it. We have so many more. And the worst case in our office is when that phone call comes from the sibling that the second parent passed, and now what do I do? And we have to have the person, while they're going and dealing with loss and grieving, now go move and get set up, right? This is what all of us want, is that we want to get someone set and moved and be there to help support it and help the person blossom, help the organization thrive. We don't want that. That can't be the route to residential. We can't, this is an issue bigger than the STP. There's a group in Delaware called Families Speaking Up. In New Jersey, I think we should start a new group. It should be families standing up and screaming, okay? Because we need to spend more money than we're spending, and no one wants to talk about that, but the need is so tremendous. And the cost, the human cost, of not only that grief-stricken person having to go and then try to figure out how they're going to make a life for themselves, but the pain of the families, right? Did you happen to bring the Rolling Stone article? Yeah. Okay. All right. So can you just find that? Oh, you printed it out? Oh, no. This is it. Okay. So there was a. I may need you to find it. I may need you to look through here. There's a quote in here about how painful it is to me. There's a great article in Rolling Stone that just came out last week.
It's called Luke's Best Chance, One Man's Fight for His Autistic Son. Rolling Stone.
He's a long-term writer for Rolling Stone. He has a son with Fragile X, and he talks about it. And there's so many poignant points in there, but there's one There's one piece in there. You may not be able to find it. We'll have to email it to you. But there's one quote just essentially about how that the fear of what will happen when I'm gone, right? You know, I was at one of the United Way receptions in the first project, there was a cocktail reception. There was all families there, and I was listening to someone who worked on the project telling someone that this was so meaningful. They were having such an impact. And do you know that on moving day, one of the parents said to me, I can die now. I know these are horrible terms, right, and things to think about. And afterwards, I went over to that person. I said, you see all that family that was in the room? That's what we're all saying. That's what it's about. It's knowing that your person is set and they're with an organization that you have faith in and you can help support it so it thrives, blossoms, survives you.
Here.
Right?
That's what you want.
No.
Sorry.
But it's fabulous also. I'll skip that. I'll have to come back to that. Maybe Denise is answering questions. I'll find it and I'll read it for you. Okay, let's look at the next slide. So even with a pay job, it's really unaffordable. Okay, so there's my sort of chance. Build, occupy, operate, float. And then the fifth word, we're going to say impossible, right? Okay. Now, these are all projects across the country. And there's the Coalition for Community Choice urge you, go on their website, we have materials, membership is free. And they also have a housing network where people are posting information about projects as they're cropping up. So there's Bitter Street Farms in Ohio, Ark Village. This one just opened, by the way. It's a couple hundred people, 100% disabled. The state got behind the Ark to do it. They supported it. They had a housing initiative there that you had to have 80%, at least 80% of the people in your project disabled. Not in New Jersey. Okay? Now, is it those slides actually were made when we had our first plan, where it really was, unless you exist in most of those projects we don't have here, right? But afterwards, maybe I have to make the X a little smaller and say probably not, and if I was gonna bet the farm, no pun intended, I'd probably bet that we're not gonna see a lot of these, because listen to that circumstance, right? That's really a problem. Okay, so here's the listening sessions, and you can also write in. And you're only limited to 3 minutes, okay? And I think the single most important thing that you can tell people when you're testifying is, I want and need choices, right? We need an array of services, not just because there's an array of needs. The young man that elopes, he needs a campus. Because you know what? One of our clients had an eloper in a community-based group home, and he was hit by a car, and he passed away. If he had been in a campus with a buffer, he'd still be here with us. Those are how critical, how important, how human the impact is of this. So we need people to come out and tell the state, this is what I want, okay? I want my loved one to choose who they live with, right? Let's get back to that again, because I almost couldn't wrap my head around that the first time, right? That is an underlying premise of forced inclusion, which is that there's something fundamentally bad. And, you know, people have a right to choose. You know, in my community, all the bocce players, they all hang out together. I'm trying to break into that. Okay?
Is there a constitutional issue?
Well, okay, I would tell you that when the plan first came out, we spent a week thinking, Americans with Disabilities Act, the law against discrimination, so many things. And honestly, we have been drowning in this step of it. I will tell you some good news though. There is a national coalition that is looking at these issues with some resources behind it. And I think we are going to see, we're going to see lawsuits. But you know what? Let's not wait for the lawsuits.
I mean, that's 10 years.
Right.
I mean, a lawsuit is 10 years of pain, because we need that. We need to do advocacy and get the rules changed. In order to institute a lawsuit, someone has to be harmed. So this has to go into effect. People have to be harmed, And then these suits can take 10 years to get up to the Supreme
And
Court.
Ohio did it. We can do it, right?
I'd like to just address, I know there are many JESPY clients in the room, and it's really important, if you can come tomorrow to advocate, to say to DDD, to see me as a person, and not someone that you can just put these rules on like I don't exist. You should be able to make your own choices. You should have every choice that everyone in this room that doesn't have a disability has. And all of us can choose. We can choose to live with other people of our same religion. We can choose to live with other people of our same age, whatever we want. And if, you know, none of this is forcing people to live with other people with disabilities. Nobody's saying you have to live that way, but I also think you have JESPY. JESPY is an incredible institution. I shouldn't say institution, incredible organization, yes. Excuse me, that has built a community here in South Orange, and people have friends, and people have husbands and wives, and there's no reason that anyone here should have to, you know, not have a choice of who they live with, or where they live, or how they spend their day, based on a bureaucratic mandate somewhere else that doesn't even know you. And I think that part of this is just, I feel like they're just not seeing people. They have to see that, you know, I'm an individual, I'm a person, I'm standing in front of you, and I don't want you to put these mandates on me. Trust me to make my own decisions. Trust me to know when I want to go into town in South Orange and when I want to hang out at JESPY House with other people with disabilities. I mean, it's crazy to have to say it that way.
Denise, you should put that in writing
But
for all of us.
Yes, in fact, in our materials, you can.
And we'll plagiarize.
Okay, we can send a follow-up, but I honestly feel like there's a piece of this, and I think it happened, you know, in a lot of kinds of prejudices where people didn't see other people that they didn't know, that they didn't understand. They didn't see them as human beings, and it allowed prejudice and discrimination to happen in the country. And I sort of feel like that is a piece of this, because it is just completely not possible that you could have this plan and be talking about African Americans. Oh, that if there's 20, or Jews, or women. I mean, it is just completely not possible, right? But how could we sit here in 2016 and be speaking about this for people with disabilities? What is that, a different category that can be discriminated against, where other categories we understand very fully that's not okay? It's crazy.
There's two interesting things about it, and then we're going to go to questions, because we're probably not going to film the Q&A, because I like to keep that loose for people. So there's two things I want to say. One is that what started out to fight discrimination, because we used to put people away and force them into seclusion, has now become another way of forcing people, a different type of discrimination, giving people less choices. So I think that's I won't say ironic, it's sad. The other thing is too, I want to tell you a story, okay? And I think that this story is going to put the human face on what's wrong with ideology over ideas, okay? So I mentioned that Allendale project. I lived in Allendale. I have a 26-year-old with autism, 26 today, as I said. And we got involved with this project. I knew my son would never live there, because my son is really severely disabled, you know, has limited language, has lots of behavioral challenges for a period, had lots of medical challenges as well. And that was going to be for independent living. But that was really important to us. I mean, I remember my younger son actually did a fundraiser in the high school to help support it, because we knew that was important for the community to embrace and see, and that's what we should do with that land. And the town was amazing, and the mayor of Allendale, Vince Barra, was a wonderful, fabulous person, really committed to this idea. So after that got built, then we said, you know what, let's talk about something for people that need 24/7. So we worked with United Way, and they spent a long time and a lot of money and a lot of planning and a lot of people hours. We brought families in that had very disabled children. We brought providers in. We brought some autism experts in. We looked at things around the country. We said, what do we want, okay? Some people did want community-based group homes, and they wanted it in their community. But you know what? That cluster is a clinical piece too. So we said, let's put 2 houses together in a basement apartment. That way, if the staff is short, you can move staff a little bit easier than if you're 6 miles from each other, right? It means the behavior analysts, if you need them, can get to 9 people in shorter time. It means that if Johnny's having a bad day, you can pick up the phone and go, we're having a bad day. You know what, we're having a great day. Beth went home for the weekend. And shift, right? So there's real clinical reasons for it, on why for some people. This was a mini cluster, right? This wasn't even a cluster. I mean, honestly, when I'm planning and dreaming and I'm traveling in the country and I continue, I'm actually going to Kansas, I don't know if I told you, to see a program out there in 2 weeks, that when you ask families what they want, so often they do talk about that, walking into a program where there is also this sense of the specialized community. Sometimes specialized is not discriminatory the way they are seeing it, the opponents. Okay, so what happened? We said, let's do that. So the Ramsey had a piece of property, and it's a little bit complicated to explain whether donated, but they used funds to get it, and there was a property, and it was a great piece of property because it was right smack in the middle of a residential neighborhood. So this wonderful project was built called Airmont Woods. If you want to take a look at it, it's on Bergen County United Way's website. I had hoped that my son would live in that house. And unfortunately, we couldn't because he had a terrible neurological, the only way to describe it is an assault on his brain that caused some very severe medical issues. He lost 100 pounds in 3 months. He's a big guy, but 50 was probably okay, but 100 was pretty terrifying. So he didn't get to go. But I was there at the start of that, and the concept was we're going to spend a lot of time, money, resources, attention, and then we're going to rinse, repeat all over the state. That really was the phrase, right? So the house opens, and I have 2 families I'm going to tell the story to you. And what's the bottom line in the story is that who gets to decide what an institution is? Because I think people are playing fast and loose with that and labeling institutions, and they're not anywhere near an institution. So let me tell you the 2 stories of these 2 young men, okay? I'm going to call them M and J, okay? So M is in a group home that's not working for a variety of reasons. So that family looks and looks and looks, and they find the apartment in the bottom of Airmont Woods. 2 upstairs are 2 classmates from their program that they've been in for decades. So this is like great. There's other families they know. They actually move all his stuff in, actually decorate for the holiday. He doesn't sleep there that night though. But the next morning, that mom gets a call from the state and says, "You can't live there." What do you mean he can't live there? He lives there. I had the truck. I moved the tree and the couch.
And paid rent.
Right, it paid rent for like 3 months. He can't live there. Well, how many meetings have I been to at DDD? Like, you know about this, okay? And this top official said he can't live there because that would be 9, and 9 is an institution. And he walked around for months. He didn't get to live there. He's still in the group home. That really isn't a match. And he walked around for months saying, I'm going to say his name because his mom talked to me on the way in, Mike's apartment, okay? That's the real human piece of how deranged this inclusion movement has come, that they could think that a house in a community is an institution because the number of beds, right? Not done with that story. One of Mike's classmates, now a person who's in the same adult program, his mom, who's a widow, is looking. She looks at Airmont Woods for the room upstairs. Okay, it gets screened, they say it's a match. 2 empty rooms, right? I'm following this project. My son is now, at that point, he was in Florida, he was there, he's finally, now he's here, thankfully, in South Jersey. And so I saw her, and she told me, I'm so happy, because she actually said to me, I am going to get him in a group home, settled, at a place that I know that's going to exist before I die. So she was so happy, okay? A month later, he can't go in. Why? They're holding those beds for Return Home New Jersey. Remember that horrible policy, which we killed by statute, thankfully, where we were ripping people out of state that had been there for 20, 30 years, out of campuses, by the way, to put them in community-based group homes, where not everyone can be safely served. Those beds sat empty for months, okay? He didn't go. She had a stroke. And after a couple days, she passed away. And those days where he was at her bedside, all I could think was, please don't let her be aware. Please don't let her be sitting and knowing that he's there and knowing she didn't get it done. Those are the human costs. I'm not finished with my 2 guys. Next is, okay, maybe we could put them together. Her son is an orphan with an only living relative, a cousin in Kansas. Thankfully, his day program has been with him since he's 3 years old, and became his family. And he had a paid job. He works at the community college. You know, we don't want to disrupt him, so we want to look in northern New Jersey. So now we got another United Way project, Tenafly. Almost similar as Orchard Commons. It's a little cluster. I think it's 10 apartments, a couple 1 or 2 bedrooms. They're going to go into one of the apartments. Well, they actually had a reception where people were going to meet roommates, and one where they actually were going to have them tour the thing. And I said, I'm not doing it. Okay, we already had Mike saying Mike's apartment. Let's wait until it all gets approved and they move in. And it went on for months, the fight. And 8 out of 10, they wouldn't let them have the 100%. Guess who didn't go? Mike and Jack. And so someone else is in that apartment, not with DDD funds. And Mike is in a place that isn't meeting his needs, and the parents are tortured. And Jay is in his mother's condo with just hourly workers supporting him. That's not a life. I guess the inclusionist would tell us that's awesome. Yeah, there he is in an apartment building, but it's not what she wanted for him. And those are the real human stories here. And it's also the absurdity, right? This is absurd. Those are not institutions. I agree. We don't want to be over here. That was a mistake. We did it wrong. We spent too much money. And people were secluded. But we can't come all the way over here and all we have is this choice. And you know, the way to look at this, and when I follow this, you know, I'm very involved on the national level, that often when there's meetings, everyone is talking about that, you know, this is a rights issue, that it's about choice. I always point out it's also about need, because for some people there's a clinical need for that, for the cluster and the supervision. But it's couched in terms of it's a civil rights issue, and I agree, it is absolutely a civil rights issue, but it's a human rights issue. Because we are affecting people's lives. We are actually causing suffering. There's suffering. It's not just, oh, this isn't a good thing, we're not moving forward. People are being harmed. So we need you to get out there, and we need you to tell the state, because this is what a public comment period is for. They write the plan, and then the public reacts, and they're supposed to react to the public's comment. We had over 1,000 comments last time that told them that restrictions weren't good. So now we had to come back. There was two petitions. One had 800, the other had 1,500. People are speaking, and not everybody even knows about this, right? So I think that we need to have our voices heard, because there is a very skewed, dangerous view out there about what should be allowed and what is right. And I can't live with, and if my friend is up there and listening, I talked to the family member today and told them that I will fight until my knuckles are bloody on this one, because this is just plain wrong. Okay, thank you, and get out there.
I think most of us would need guidance in terms of how do we get out there, where do we go, who do we write to, what do we say that would be most practical.
Right. Okay, so it's in our